The next session for the day, understanding the challenges of returning cultural heritage items. We will have 3 speakers. The participants in this panel will discuss the challenges of returning cultural heritage items, whether it be financial challenges, getting a building, finding a place to store the works, politics, unwillingness of collectors, institutions to return items. This session could be, we could get a lot of speakers for this one. However, our first speaker is James Bier. He serves as museum director for the Ynez band of Chumash, Ynez. He attended Florida International University and has previously held positions at the Agua Caliente Culture Museum and the Lucia store in Miami. Is that, am I saying that right? L-E, I'm not sure I'm saying the word right. Okay. He said, yeah, like a gallery. All right, please welcome James.
This is my opportunity to vent. Okay. So, thank you to the Autry and thank you to Joe for this opportunity. What I'd really like to start off with is our mission. Let's see here. How does this work? There we go. So, our mission is to foster respect, share knowledge, and encourage dialogue about Chumash culture. We connect the past, present stories to shape a shared future. We do this by collecting, preserving, and presenting the rich heritage of the Chumash people. I came into the Chumash, San Ynez Chumash Museum about a little over a year and a half ago. And I did not come into this project as their director. I came in as a consultant, specifically to get the project back on track from being idle due to COVID and from the pause of COVID. From that aspect of the delays inherited from COVID, they hired me, took me from Agua Caliente, and I started my journey. And basically, I started with a task of forensic analysis on organizing their objects and editing, extensive editing for exhibit media. That organized their exhibits and gave some momentum to get them back on track, to go back into production and get us to where we are today. I currently support a 12-member museum board, as well as manage 10 museum team members. We're preparing for the museum's opening and currently developing policies and procedures. Day-to-day operations and handling cultural item intake are a big part of my role. Challenges is an understatement. Basically, we have limited labor, limited time, balancing tasks, and budget constraints, they can all be tough. Our storage is currently, we're basically running out of storage already, and we're not even open. We're due to open potentially in the first quarter of next year. But thankfully, TIPO and NAGPRA follow-ups are not handled by myself or the museum. So thankfully, I only handle intake of acquisitions or donations that are slated as non-sacred or non-funerary. So it kind of makes my life easier to handle those intakes, and that's a thankful aspect of it. But we also face logistical issues, community engagement demands, and high expectations from our community. So I would say that to break it down in a very simple fashion would be we have this tug of war between our mission and community expectations, and they don't really equal each other all the time. So it's just making those two happen, and the juggling between those two is what I'm basically confronted with on a weekly basis. Our progress and milestones. So we've successfully processed over 4,000 cultural items in the past year. That was from an acquisition that we were negotiating for several years, and it finally happened. But we still have run into some obstacles during that process, and it's been a very slow process because of our staffing. Our collection space, 3D printing capability, and website are in place, and fortunately, our 3D printing and scanning capability will also be supporting our NAGPRA and TIPO initiatives, which initially we weren't. We only brought that in to support our storage mount production purposes. Exhibit items are conserved, and the facility is nearly ready to open. So again, it's an ongoing juggle of progress, and like I'd say one step forward or two steps forward and one step back. So it is a positive process, but it's a very slow process. We're excited to grow our resources and strengthen community ties. Our long-term vision includes thoughtful repatriation efforts and collaboration with other institutions. We're committed to making a lasting educational and cultural impact, preserving Chumash heritage for future generations. That concludes my presentation.
Our next presenter is Mike Blackwolf. He's an enrolled member of the Ynez tribe of Fort Belknap Reservation, home of the Groban and Assiniboine tribes, located in beautiful Montana. Blackwolf is currently the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer at Fort Belknap and has represented the Groban and Assiniboine tribes on countless government to government consultations and meetings. He works closely with all Tribal Historic Preservation Officers in the Great Plains states and surrounding regions. Please welcome Mike.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Michael Blackwolf, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. I Again, Joe mentioned I'm a board member of the Ynez, also known as the Grovon tribe for Belknap. I'm also half Cree. We call ourselves Native and our native language in that tribe. And I've been the preservation officer for Fort Belknap since January of 2014. And a little bit of background, so Fort Belknap Indian Reservation is located in north central Montana. It's about as isolated as a place as you could possibly get. An extremely isolated reservation, no major cities, no major towns. And I live on the southern end of the reservation, which is even more isolated than the northern end part of the reservation. So I live in an extremely rural area, and I commute 36 miles one way to work and back home every day. And so in January of 14, I was asked to come aboard as the TIPO to kind of help our tribes out. There was a couple things going on with our TIPO program at the time. I came on board and I helped rectify a few situations, and I've been the TIPO ever since. And needless to say, it was definitely on-the-job training. Oftentimes we get ourselves into, we get humbled. And I was asked to do this job because of my cultural upbringing. I was born into my culture, customs, traditions, language, my Cree language, but also a real heavy dose of the Grovon customs, beliefs, traditions from my maternal grandfather. And so I always like to mention them whenever I talk, that I wouldn't be the person I am here today if it wasn't for both of my grandfathers, my paternal grandmother. I didn't have the opportunity to meet my maternal grandmother. She passed away before I was born. Numerous uncles, several aunts on my paternal side that really helped make me who I am today. So I thought, well, I have this cultural knowledge, I know these things, I know stories, and needless to say, it was very humbling when I had to really almost learn the job, on-the-job training to learn about NAGPRA, to learn about National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106, all that fun stuff. And like I said, it's been almost 11 years now, and it was the dream job I never knew that I wanted, basically. Those of us that are TIPOs, or TIPOs, or work with TIPOs, you know and realize that there are not enough hours in the day for us to accomplish what we do. So on top of just doing the TIPO duties, at Fort Belknap, one of our biggest hurdles for us for repatriating and bringing items back home is infrastructure. We just don't have the ability to build a new building. We don't have the resources. We don't have the financial resources to do it. Another major hurdle for us. But also, when we're talking about infrastructure, at our main tribal headquarters, it's called Fort Belknap Agency, that community is tapped out when it comes to the other infrastructure that we don't think. That's all the underground infrastructure, the water, the sewer, all that kind of thing. There's just literally no abilities currently to, if we even wanted to build a museum, or if we had the resources to build a museum, we just don't have the infrastructure to do it. So fast forward to January of this past year, with the new NAGPRA regulations and making it much easier for us to repatriate cultural items. There's been a recent push back home for us to start looking into different ways of repatriation and bringing back those items that we have. Again, it comes back to, basically resources. We don't, we're unfortunately, almost every tribe in Montana has gaming, but we don't have gaming in the traditional sense of like a lot of the big revenue generating tribes. Our tribal casinos maybe half the size of this room here, and we probably break even or make a little bit of a profit each fiscal year. And so we just don't really have, and we're more of a grant-driven tribe, so we don't really have unrestricted funds when it comes to projects. Most of the funds come in for us are grants from, vast majority of our government grants would have a lot of government restrictions on how we can use these funds. And then the second one for my program specifically is that not only am I the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, but I'm also the NAGPRA representative, as with many of us TIPOs. When we get funding from the National Park Service to start up Tribal Historic Preservation offices, most of us only get enough funding to basically cover the costs of the Tribal Historic Preservation officer's salary and maybe a little bit of travel money to go and do some consultation throughout the year. And so we have most of us have no support staff. Luckily, our tribal councils have been very supportive of this office over the past 11 years. And as hard as it is financially, our tribal government has really stepped up and given us additional funding from the tribe's general fund for us to hire an assistant tribal historic preservation officer. And we're in the process of hiring an office manager for our program right now. But again, we just don't have the resources or the time to really have a fully staffed tribal historic preservation office on par like with most state historic preservation offices. When you look at the staff of any respective state, they have the SHPO, assistant, archaeologist, archives, all these other things that they have. We just don't get that funding as TIPOs. So as we are looking at wanting to take advantage of the new NAGPRA regulations, we just don't really have the resources to do it. And that's just one of the realities that we deal with. And currently, we have one agreement in place with the University of Montana to house some of our items. Should we want to repatriate, we can, but that's across the state in Missoula, Montana. We have nothing nearby. I shouldn't say nothing. Our own tribal college, Ahwahnee Nakota College, has a small place for collections and repository. I think we have 2 or 3 items in there that they're stored in their collection, but it's very, very small. Small room, essentially, is what it is. So as we're looking at potentially bringing items back, I've had multiple calls where it was like, hey, we have your stuff, do you want them back? And it's like, it's not that we don't want them, we just physically can't bring them back. Fortunately, within the next week or 2, we are going to look into basically a brainstorming session, and we're going to have tribal leaders, we're going to have members of our tribal college, and maybe a few other people, and we're going to get together and start looking, seeing what we can come up with as far as it is for the resources for some things, Ben. Good job, man. And really, you know, so it's always been a dream of mine for people when I get to visit and we get to talk that, you know, I'm not always just wanting a collections, a repository, a museum. Those things are great. We're talking about history, items of our past, even though a lot of these things are living and representations. One thing that it's always been a dream of mine is we have 4 main communities on our reservation. We have Fort Belknap Agency, we have Dodson, which is, it's not really an official town site, but just off the reservation is the town of Dodson. And then on the south end of the reservation, we have Lodgepole and we have Hayes. But it's always been a dream of mine is to establish cultural centers, a living cultural center where we can continue on with like ceremonies, songs, hand games, Sundance singings, you know, just things to keep the culture going in those regards. And so it can be discouraging at times, but it's something that I'll never give up on because this is too important. And we're really hopeful that we can get something going and to bring some of our items back. As an example, last year we got to visit collections at Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana, and there was an immense collection there, and they opened up one drawer, and in that drawer it was nothing but eagle bone whistles. And for those of you that aren't familiar with most of us Plains tribes, very, very significant items to us. And those definitely should not be in collection, and really they shouldn't be brought home to any respective tribe and put in their collection. Those things are living cultural items that need to be used. They have to be used. They were created to be used. Unless, of course, from whatever reason or another, they will be put away. And I won't go into that here. I don't feel comfortable talking about certain cultural things, but if those things were meant to be put away, then they would be put away. But they shouldn't be in collection. And just the reason that we had proof on that, we were there, one of the drawers came out. Those of you that know in collections, you know, you pull the drawers out, they're very sturdy. There was a drawer that came out that had society rattles, it had several pipes in it, and myself and 2 other TIPOs and museum staff were there, standing there, and we had a conversation, and we were all about 3 feet away from the drawer, and the drawer picks up, comes out, and throws itself on the floor. So those items were telling us they didn't want to be there. They wanted to go home. So I don't think my story is unique. A lot of us TIPOs are essentially one-man or one-woman shows and extremely restricted funds. And, you know, in the perfect world, if it was up to me, I would build a museum, a collections, a repository, and also I would, you know, maybe house our Tribal Historic Preservation Office, our language preservation program in there, our NAGPRA obviously would be in there. But that's just kind of where we're at and the kind of issues that we have. But, you know, I said, I don't want to sound all doom and gloom because, you know, that's something that I won't give up on. And I have an excellent deputy TIPO, you know, and when I ever leave, you know, she'll carry the torch, the mantle, so to speak, as we still try to move forward and look into establishing our own repository and collections back at Fort Belknap.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Sven Haakanson, is a member of Old Harbor Alutiiq tribe, born and raised in rural Kodiak Island community of Old Harbor, Alaska. He holds a BA in English from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and a PhD in anthropology from Harvard University. Sven has worked to share Native American perspectives with museums, as well as museum practices with Native people. He is a curator of Native American anthropology at the Burke Museum of Natural History. Please welcome Sven.
First, Clea and Joe for inviting me to share. Like Aaron, I have an hour to talk, right? Joe seemed to think well, first I just want to start with recognizing this wonderful man. I feel very lucky to have had the privilege to get to know him. Marshall McKay, over the years, I had the privilege to serve on Native Arts and Cultures Foundation Board, and then also through ATOM. And so it's really nice to have this kind of recognition of this individual. And one of the things that was really funny about Marshall is he gave me a coin. And he's like, every time you come to a meeting, I want you to bring it to me. And we met maybe 3 times a year, so I had to remember always to bring it. But I did. And some people would think, well, why would you do that? But it was more about us connecting through that coin every time. But also, I would think about him when I would carry it. Sadly he passed, but then my house was robbed and they stole that coin. So I lost that. But I still have that connection with him because of the story he created with me. So, okay, so just to talk really fast, I want you guys to be thinking about local and global, where how do we see each other? What is history? For me, it is past, living in the present, is lessons for our future. So every cultural piece, every heritage, every item that we care for is knowledge we can learn from. Knowledge that we can use to reinstill that knowledge that was stripped away from us and put it back into a living context. How do we use the history? How do we control it? Who controls it? How do we manage that? And then what happens when we ask questions that are uncomfortable and challenging? Our knowledge, our presence, our ways of being and understanding, who are we? As you heard from all the previous speakers, they're pushing us to start thinking about, hey, this is hard stuff. This is hard things that we are facing, hard things and challenges that we're uncovering. I look at it as an onion. Every time you unpeel one layer, you want to cry. And we can keep doing that. But how do we use this knowledge to move forward? This is where knowledge becomes power for us. And as all of you as scholars, you're sitting in, you might not feel it, but you're sitting in positions of power. Power to share knowledge, power to influence, power to change our future. So, in a lot of my presentations, I start with our history, our past, our present, our responsibility, and our future. And I say our, meaning all of us, native and non-native. We need each other to be able to move forward. Yes, we need to acknowledge the past. We need to understand that. And it's ugly at times. And it can be angry, it can be mad, it can do all of that. It can eat you up. It did me for the first 8 years of graduate school. But then I had the privilege to go and work with Nennet reindeer herders. Who are they? I got to live with a group where they had all of this knowledge in a lived context. They're still speaking their language, they're practicing their traditional beliefs. They don't outright say that. And they're living their traditional ways. And so I had that privilege where I had my eyes opened up with, hey, wait a minute. Theirs is a living culture. Traditional ways of living, language, beliefs, heritage, all passed on in a living context. I grew up where our language was forbidden. Our cultural heritage was stripped away from us. We didn't have any of that. We had none of this stuff. But how do we get that back? How do we get the knowledge back? I wanted to use archaeology because we don't have a written history. I wanted to do archaeology in order to understand the deep history of my own community. This village goes back over 7,000 years. But we didn't know that until the mid-80s. We didn't know about this knowledge. How do we bring that knowledge back into a living context? We need to understand the history. And the history is ugly at times. You know, we have Russian and American colonialism. We had two in Alaska. Two colonial powers of suppression. So in dealing with that, all right, how do we relearn from this? So I started diving into history books, using archaeology, but then looking at the written history. And some of the earliest writings in English is Captain Cook's voyage in 1778. And there's a lot there. So if you're looking at that history, look at what his officers wrote, not what Captain Cook wrote. And I put this in here because it's important. Through which we descended on a ladder made of thick piece of wood with steps cut into it, in a dark and dirty cave, seemingly underground, where our noses instantly saluted with a potent stink of putrid fish, which was scattered about the house. We were welcomed to these murky caves by the master of the house and his wife and other females sitting together in one part of the hut. Having been used to many strange scenes since we left England, we spent no time in staring about us with vacant astonishment, but immediately made love to the handsomest woman in company, who in order to make us welcome, refused us no favor she could grant, though her husband and father stood by. Husband does pay proper attention to the women, etc., etc., etc. To me, when I read that, I was like, wait a minute here. 5 years later, the same thing happened to my tribe. This is with the Unaman people. These men came in and raped the women in front of their husbands because they could not defend them. The Russians at that time had already taken their weapons away. They'd already destroyed their large boats so they couldn't escape. 5 years later, the same thing happened to my tribe. And that living history, when you start to unpeel that, it's not pretty. It can make you so angry it eats you up. It's unhealthy. How do we fix that? I mean, I used to really like looking at Weber's drawings, but this to me is just evidence of before the rape, before they do whatever they wanted. And this is part of the colonial histories that we're living with. As we start to understand, it's like, why are we doing what we do, and how do we change that? How do we change that? It's a snapshot of the past and our present. We have to rebuild knowledge that is discussed and scattered historical accounts and collections outside of our communities. Historical accounts give us a snapshot of what happened and show us what we're still dealing with in our communities today. How we were viewed and treated? Clothes there. And after living in Siberia, I prefer to have the traditional clothing. Because they were probably a lot warmer than in the European clothing. But life today, we run corporations, billion-dollar corporations now. We do celebrate Orthodoxy. We're Christians. We celebrate the 4th of July. We're American. So we have that. But one of the things that was opened my eyes when I was working in Siberia is like, how do we put this knowledge that's been taken away back into a living context? First grant I wrote for when I had the privilege to work at the Alutiiq Museum was a program where we took the museum collections out to each of the villages. And if you want to talk about remote, you have to fly to Kodiak. And then from Kodiak, you have to fly by small planes to each of the villages. Or you can take, a 5-hour boat ride. So the villages are very, very remote. And I had the privilege to work with the village of Alutiiq. And over the years, and over 13 years, we brought back knowledge from each of these museum collections. I learned how to sew, I learned how to weave, I learned how to carve. And I worked with artisans, and I went with them. And it was important because I needed to be also doing that work as well. I had the privilege to have access to all this knowledge, but I needed to be able to give it back. We need to be able to give it back. And we talk about the repatriation. And it's like, yes, it'd be nice to get those things, but I'm not going to wait. I want that knowledge to go back into health. I want to make sure to empower our youth with this knowledge so they know who they are and where they're from. It doesn't matter where they go. If they know who they are and where they're from, you can never take that away. That's knowledge. To what else is out there. So I spent the last 20 years researching collections around the world. And bringing back knowledge, working with artisans. The Ynez is one of the most recent projects. That disappeared from our lived knowledge. And doing work around the world, I found 15 model Ynez. And so working with the Alutiiq Kids Camp, the elder Mitch was like, oh, let's make them. I'm like, okay, so that was easy. I was able to make those model Ynez. And learning about the history of, this bulbous bow, where it's, designed, basically, our people preceded supercomputers. The supercomputers were used to design that bulbous bow on these boats by the U.S. Navy. Yet our people had that for over 1,000 years. Talk about engineering. And so, Mitch, after we made those model Ynez, said, hey, let's make a full-size one. I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. So, I gathered wood, worked with communities in Seattle through the Burke Museum to make a frame, and then I went back to the village of Alutiiq, and in a week we worked together. You have 3 generations here, father, grandfather, and his son, all of us working together from a model. There are no full-size Ynez that exist in the world until this project from our tribe. Working with them, we were able to make a frame in 2015. And then from there, we made the frame. I went back to the Burke, we finished that one there, and we sailed that one in the spring of 2016. So, using museum collections, not worrying about nectar, not worrying about what's happening, taking that knowledge and putting it back into a living context. And what was really important about this project is bringing the community into it, and so that they owned the knowledge. Not the Burke Museum, not Sven. They own that knowledge. And how do we do that? Roll up your sleeves and do it. Don't wait for others. So here's, can you play the video, please?
Boats are all important. That's how we feed our families. Well, the Ynez has been a dream of ours for a long time.
The Ynez is a dream that my father had.
This is something that he's always wanted to build.
My role in building the Ynez is helping my father realize his dream.
The camp started when my husband and I first sobered up.
My parents, when they quit drinking, it's like their eyes got open to the village.
This is a culture camp. They're learning their culture while they're here. They're learning how to hunt,
How to process food.
how to cook it, how to store it.
Showing the kids how to share cultural artwork.
And so it's the culture here of learning. This is what I see. I see a community that's healing.
So what's important about this is 30 seconds after that, this is what happened. We didn't realize we had to put 300 pounds of ballast in that vessel because it was so light. But we're learning as we go. We're making mistakes. I like to joke with folks, but I've made a lot of firewood from carving. And that's part of it. And teaching that knowledge, but putting it back into a living context so that the next generation owns it. I know that my time is up, but I just want to put a plug into a video that we just came out with. It's on PBS. It's called "In Knowledge to Keep Us." That talks about the camp itself and that whole process of, it's been a project of over 10 years of reporting. But I want to go right to the end. I'm going to skip through a couple things here. I wanted to go right to the end to talk about what I want to challenge all of you as scholars to think about here. So these are all the different things I'm involved with now. Well, I'm going to stop here. At the Burke Museum, having the privilege to be the curator, we were able to acknowledge this information in 2019. We started writing this stuff in 2017. Let's acknowledge these paths so we're not stuck there. And be open about it. Don't hide it. But I wanted to ask you, acknowledging our past is just the start of our work as scholars and our work with our communities. How are you using this privilege to make the changes that we all need, we all see and need to happen? How do we support each other? Because it's hard work, both with the museums and with us doing the cultural work. But again, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for the great sessions. I wrote down several comments, and then actually had a good friend of mine write, which I really think sort of summarizes all my comments, is what is, in your opinion, what is a museum's responsibilities to Native communities outside of just returning objects? So I think Sven, in a way, addresses what you were talking about with access. Mike, I think it addresses about resources and infrastructure. James, I think it addresses yours about not just staff, but also training of staff. So, in your own opinion, what should be a museum's responsibilities? Because just, museum, okay, these collectors 100 years ago went and took these works, ethical, unethical means. They built an institution around them. We have them. And laws are passed, or sometimes collectors, like the one Jordan mentioned, they want to return a headdress. They say, all right, well, we'll give it back. Is that the end of the museum's responsibility?
My view is it's a continuous evolution of the narrative of that particular tribe, what story they want to portray, what they want to communicate. I see myself as a facilitator of that, not the creator of the story, but I am the problem solver, and I'm there to make it happen, and to do it with the utmost respect and sensitivity. My formal training was in the fine art world, and in that contrast of where I am now, I would say that I have the wonderful opportunity of contributing my creative approach to solve problems. Let that be coming up with storage solutions, or a conservation approach, and the thing is that the term best practices for a cultural museum is not the same as best practices for a fine art museum. And I think just identifying that difference and respecting it is I think the foundation of giving that heritage, the cultural heritage, it's all due respect.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would think that, from my perspective, a responsibility of the museum, ideally a tribal museum, is to have items, cultural items for their respective tribes and nations closer to home and more readily available for tribal members or especially family members to have access to. And the reason I say that is we also repatriated some of our children from Carlisle this past September. And while we were there, we had the opportunity, from a great tip from somebody, to visit the National Museum of, our American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And that is where they have the largest collection of Gros-Ventre items, literally in the United States. And while we were there, I got to see and hold my great-great-grandfather's replica shield. And Aaron is right, the shields were made out of one solid piece of rawhide, but among our people we had replica shields. And these were the small shields that Aaron was talking about, that do have a hoop, and they were made out of thin pieces of rawhide. And we would use these to reenact our war deeds. And I got to hold my great-great-grandfather Black Wolf's dance shield and also a replica lance. And there's amazing stories behind that, but I know we don't have time. But it was awesome to be able to hold my great-great-grandfather's items that he created with his own hands. And so, but I have to go to New York City for that. And in my opinion, if we had our own tribal museum, our own tribal archives, that would be readily available for my children, my grandchildren, my brothers, sisters, all my relatives, all the descendants of Black Wolf, and all of the other cultural items that belong to both the Nakota and the Ynez, right there at home. So I think it would be an amazing opportunity, but not only that, but a responsibility, if we do have tribal museums, to have easier access for our tribal members to be able to come and see them, to hold them, to view them, to get ideas on how to make or construct things themselves.
So Sven, before you answer, based on both of your responses, I think I worded the question not the way I meant to word the question. So I'm going to try your question all over again, okay? So, large museums that hold items from your communities. For example, the Alutiiq, right? We have 230-something thousand Native American objects in this building. So museums like the Alutiiq, what should be, and I'm saying, I work here, so, but theoretically, places like the Alutiiq, American Museum of Natural History, just talking, because by the way, Mike and I belong to the same tribe. Like the Alutiiq, the Field Museum, American Museum of Natural History, the big institutions. What should be their responsibilities to communities? That's what I meant by the question, not travel museums. So, should they train folks in order to work at travel museums? Should they provide some type of financial support to communities who maybe aren't necessarily in a position now for infrastructure to build a museum? Should they make sure that collections are always accessible? Sven, as you talked about, so I think I worded the question, in my head it sounded right, but I think I had a wire loose coming down, so that was supposed to be the question, so I apologize for that.
Well, first it should be make sure to provide full access to the community members. I mean, that should be just blanket for every institution. The second is the financial stuff is always going to be a challenge. I want to say I had the privilege, but I actually had a museum run me for 13 years, and I spent over half the time trying to raise funds to keep the institution open. And that's a huge burden on our community, to have a museum, state-of-the-art museum. So, I mean, I spent so much time just trying to make sure that we keep the doors open. And we should be spending that time and money more on the health of our community first. Yes, I understand the importance of the material culture and that knowledge, because it does help create healthier humans. But after now working at a state institution, I think about it from a very different perspective now. Okay, why are we putting that burden on the tribal museums to care for these things in perpetuity when these museums, the state-run museums, are paid by tax dollars? How can we work with the tribal museums so that, yes, we have the collections in the museums, but the tribes actually own it? And how do we care for it in that way? Developing long-term loans or exchanges, and then also providing opportunities for community members to come in to learn from the collections, to either recreate or do what they need to do to learn from that and bring it back home, but not put that financial burden on the communities. And so, again, it's something that I've started thinking about in the last 5 years very differently, because why are we putting this burden on these communities in perpetuity? It's expensive. We can't afford it. And I worry about the tribal museums running for so long, for a while, and then all of a sudden they don't have the money. What happens? And these state museums, it's state funded, it's tax dollars. How can we tap into and work with that? That's something I've been thinking about.
Now that I've rephrased the question, as they say, would you like to?
I would say it would be the responsibility would be to fill the void that each tribe has on a unique case-by-case basis, and it would be for possible housing, if that tribal museum can handle the housing and they choose to handle the housing, to facilitate training, to possibly facilitate conservation work, or train on conservation work, so they can care for those pieces. And I think it's just a case-by-case basis for each tribe, respecting their choices, and supporting. I think that would be, in my view, not dictating how that should be done, but being there to support whatever they need, if possible.
Yeah, so I think an idea would be, and obviously the cost to bring tribal members to respective museums for training and hands-on work. There's that difficulty, because most of us, will live great distances away from where our items are housed. So an idea maybe with those of us that are fortunate enough to have tribal colleges is to have, staff members come to our homelands and provide those kind of trainings for those kind of people who are either in that line of work or interested in that line of work.
Any questions from anybody out here have a question?
answer? Well, I just quote, I want to quote Jim real quick. What you try to possess will possess you. And so that's something to think about. How do we make sure that our tribes and our communities aren't being possessed by museums and that burden, financial burden? You know, really thinking about, okay, how do we do this in a way that makes sure we get that knowledge back, but we're not given that burden. Because it's huge, it's not cheap. But how do we work with the larger institutions so that we can make sure to provide full access to the communities?
All right, thank you. All right, so as we wrap up, we're wrapping up our evening. So a couple things real quick. First of all, for those of you who came on the bus, we're going to load you up. We realize we have a lot of people, which is fine. It's always good. Go to the Hilton. We'll figure that out. Hilton folks will pick you up at 7:15 this evening to take you over to the play. Also, in theory, I know it was cold in here today, to keep it cold in our facilities, to keep our ideas very fresh. So we apologize that it impacted everybody because they were chilly. I asked them to turn up the temperature tomorrow. Hopefully that'll work out. Either way, we'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock a.m. for breakfast burritos. Thank you everybody for being part of this. Appreciate it.